Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia Vegting and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Jez Francis.
And I'm Amelia Vegting, and welcome to the Being Human podcast, where we explore what it means to be human in the world we find ourselves living in. And today we're going to be talking about fear.
Yes, ever since we started talking about the idea of exploring human experiences, Amelia, there's one that I've really wanted to learn more about. Something that I'm guessing in evolutionary terms, is as old as life on Earth. And that is fear.
Later on, we're going to be joined by the seemingly fearless Vicki Anstey, one of the first women to appear on SAS Who Dares Wins and all-round adventurer, to learn more about her relationship with fears. But Jez, before we talk all things terror, should we go into boring things about me?
Absolutely. The part of our podcast where we share a humdrum moment or two from our lives to celebrate the more mundane reality of what it means to be human. So, Amelia, have you got something to kick us off with, please?
I do. Well, we happen to be recording on a Monday, and Monday evenings are my favourite night to go home and sit in front of the TV and watch BBC Two's 90 minutes from 7:30 till 9:30 of back-to-back quiz shows.
Nerd alert.
Yeah, big time. Starting off with Mastermind, which usually I get a few right, but I've never quite worked out what my Mastermind specialist subject would be. Followed by Only Connect, which baffles me every week what the sequencing of those clues are and how on earth they ever get those.
I can't even get past the hieroglyphics.
No. And then finally finishing with University Challenge, of which if I get a single question right, which I will admit I don't know when the last time I did, but when I do, I let the entire world know about it.
Ding.
So, yeah.
Vegting, Liverpool.
I wish. Go on, Jez, have you got a boring thing about me?
It's bin related.
Always a good place to start.
So last Thursday, bin day in our road, and also train strike. So I was at home, and where I work at home, the window looks out down the street so I can see what's going on, basically. So the bin men had been.
That's
And,
good.
the way they sort of slightly haphazardly they're not quite as ordered as they might be in terms of where they put the different bins. And
Right.
so I saw one of my neighbours come out of her house and sort of walk down towards the bit outside my house. And so I saw her look at the food waste bin. She sort of lifted it up and looked at it and sort of turned it round, looking for some kind of, obviously identifiable mark on it.
A full bin investigation.
Bin investigation. She then put it down and sort of walked away and then turned promptly, walked straight back, picked it up and walked off with it.
Oh.
And then she put on the WhatsApp group, street WhatsApp group, I have taken a food waste bin. I think it's ours, but I'm not sure.
Oh, quite honest, though.
Yeah.
Not doing it deceptively.
So
from
I
everyone.
replied instantly, I know, I saw you. And it is yours. And then almost as quickly again, someone else jumped in with, all right, calm down, bin monitor.
You've got a new reputation in the street now.
Yeah, so if it couldn't get any worse. But what they didn't realise was that after what I'd witnessed that Thursday morning, I was planning on doing a more formal bin audit anyway. So maybe,
Oh, dear.
maybe my new nickname is warranted. Anyway, there you go. Boring things about me. So let's get into today's conversation then and start with what we've learned looking into the subject of fear. So, Amelia, what is fear and why do we experience it?
So I think it's fair to say when we first started researching this, we realised that the depth of detail that you can go into is just absolutely ginormous.
Yeah, it's massive.
But in simple terms that hopefully you and I can get our heads around, fear is an emotional response to threat, real or otherwise. It causes what is commonly known as the fight or flight response. Fear acts as a natural response to stimuli right in that moment, whether that be someone or something, jumping out at you, or, when you anticipate something that we think might happen based on any previous experiences, or what you've learned from others and your experiences, such as watching a horror film and then being slightly afraid to go to bed at night. And then when your phone suddenly starts ringing out of nowhere, it all creeps up on you.
So fear and what we do when we experience it basically serves to keep us alive. When we perceive threat, some amazing things happen almost instantly in our brains and bodies. So that primitive or instinctive circuitry in our brain reacts first. I think if I've understood it correctly, that's almost like a burglar alarm that's sort of monitoring, always there, always switched on, monitoring for things. So when that primitive circuitry sort of fires up, it triggers the release of adrenaline and other stress hormones and parts of our nervous system that set us up for fight or flight. So our breathing increases, we take on board more oxygen, our heart rate quickens, our muscles get more glucose, our vision sharpens, and lots of other stuff happens physically. And then our thinking brain sort of steps in and applies some learned context and sort of either agrees that, yes, this threat is real and we need to react, or it sort of reassures our instinctive brain that actually, we're okay here. And then the two working together sort of process and store that experience as context for use in future situations. And all of this, by the way, happens in milliseconds. So, it's staggering, the stuff that goes on in our mind when we experience that fear in the first instant.
So I guess a good example would be, if you were camping in safari and you were to wake up to a lion poking its head through the front of your tent, compared to seeing a lion behind a reinforced window at the zoo. Yes, exactly.
So that's a super example of how our brains work when we experience fear. It also reminds me that actually many of us seek out scary experiences, even enjoy them. So if you think of horror films or roller coasters, or you combine the two and you've got Fright Night at Thorpe Park, for example, which my kids used to love going to. That adrenaline rush that we initially experience also triggers the release of dopamine, which is the sort of the reward hormone, that feel good chemical, which means that once that event has happened or the risk has been downgraded, we can actually experience that as pleasure. And it can be a distraction from some of the other, maybe less joyful things that we might have on our minds. Maybe a dissertation that's got to be handed in. I'm looking at you there. Or
all done now.
or maybe a work deadline looking at me. Or the washing that needs doing, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you're not thinking about that at the top of SOAR.
Absolutely not, no.
And I think that there's also something about that experience of fear when you're doing it with other people. You pick up on we as humans pick up on other people's emotions really quickly. Thinking of an example, I've got a friend who's absolutely terrified of bees. And whenever there's a bee around her, her response suddenly, results in me being absolutely terrified. Whereas if I, walk past a bee any other day, I'm like, bees, yes, great that they're there.
Actually, you remind me, my sister's terrified of wasps. So I spent my entire childhood trying to sort of encourage them to take part in family picnics and what have you.
But thinking about it, it is an evolutionary and survival sense. Learning from other people's experiences of fear is a fast track to, flight and fight responses. You're learning about the world that we all live in together. And I guess that's also why people get together and watch a scary film, that you experience that in the same room as other people.
Yeah, we're social creatures, as we've been learning about. So fear is about modulating and managing fear as a response, if you like, to something that's going on around us. It's all about control, really, as far as I can see. So if our thinking brain can reassure us just enough that we're okay in a situation, then we can relax and we can enjoy Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs or whatever it might be. But too much reassurance, and we sort of analyse the fun out of it. We all know someone who ruins a good horror movie with, well, that would never happen in the real world.
They'd never go down that dark hole.
Exactly. But similarly, not enough reassurance from our thinking brain, and we're back to feeling terrified again.
And I think everyone's, got a different context to it as well, which is why some people are super comfortable with, a bit of a scare fest, and others will avoid the experience at all costs. I'm definitely not one for watching a horror film. I will either leave the room or hide behind my Sudoku game.
Killer Sudoku.
Killer Sudoku, which is a very good game if anyone wants to give that a go. But, I'm in control of deciding whether or not I want to engage in that scare. In most cases, I will choose not to. But, I guess what happens if you can't avoid or control the situations? Like, what happens if you can't leave the room from your fear?
Yeah, I mean, that, we start talking about a slightly darker side of fear now. So putting the fun to be had from being frightened aside, if the threat doesn't pass or we can't control it through fight or flight, and we experience prolonged exposure, maybe during conflict or in an abusive relationship, for example, then we can experience real significant distress in our lives. Our thinking brain becomes much less effective at calming down our instinctive brain, which can result in more permanent conditioned fear responses, such as anxiety and phobias and post-traumatic stress disorders and so on. And, these can be devastating.
Yeah.
The good news is that they are increasingly treatable through new approaches to psychotherapy and medications if necessary. But there is a dark side to fear for sure.
Yeah, a really good point, Jez. And, we've both been thinking about this. Is there anything that you're afraid of?
I've never experienced sort of conflict or war. I've never been attacked, touch wood, or been held hostage, either literally or by a phobia as such. So, but there are a couple of thoughts that spring to mind. And actually, I've not really thought about it in any detail before. So I think it's been quite interesting sort of exploring kind of episodes where I've been frightened. So I remember one in particular. I was on a family holiday in the south of France. It must have been the early 80s. So I was about 10 years old, I would imagine, something like that. And I got caught in a rip current and was dragged out into the sea. Huge, big, rough Atlantic rollers, these big waves crashing and breaking. And I was very quickly getting into real trouble, and there's no two ways about it. I would have drowned had my mum and my uncle not managed to get to me and kind of get me out. So the experience itself, and it can only have lasted 5 minutes max, but that was terrifying. But because of where we were camping next to the sea.
Right.
We were there for 2 weeks. And all our families and friends and what have you wanted to be by the beach. So we kept coming back every day. And all I could hear then for the remaining sort of 10, 12 days, for most of each day, were these huge crashing waves.
So you could hear the waves even when you weren't directly on the beach.
So the threat had gone. I wasn't actually at risk anymore, but it was a horrific experience and it was prolonged. So I've never really thought about it. We came back, I got over it, life moves on. But I don't like swimming in rough sea. No. I don't like swimming in the sea in general, actually, even if it's fairly calm. And I'm a really nervous parent when my kids
go running in.
Or in the sea in particular, even if it's, North Somerset coast, mild weather, lovely long flat beach with, very shallow for a long way out. So the risk is really not there at all.
No.
And yet I am on sort of constant alert when they were down there for sure.
Yeah.
Interestingly, swimming pools don't seem to bother me at all. So it's definitely something that's contextual around that particular experience.
No, interesting.
What about you, Amelia?
Well, I do have quite a deep fear of birds. I have to say, you will not find me stood at Piccadilly Circus with my arms, spread out and bird feed all over me, inviting 200 pigeons to come flying onto my head. I do find them absolutely terrifying. And, as you were saying earlier about sort of those physical responses that your body has, that sort of alertness increase and heart rate increasing, all that sort of thing, that really resonated with me because I feel like as I'm walking around and London is a pigeon fueled city.
They're
everywhere, I feel like I clock where birds are in my vicinity much quicker than the people around me.
I saw you spot one on the walk over here.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
I will go as far as crossing the road to avoid confrontation with pigeons a couple, 30 metres ahead, if that means not having to come into confrontation with them.
Was there an experience then in your past, in your youth perhaps, that do you think that has sort of given you this kind of almost conditioned fear response?
I was in year 6, so 10, 11 years old, and we went on a school trip to this place called the Wetland Centre, of which I came into confrontation with a goose that, wings came flapping up, sort of chest puffed. And my memory of it is that I was chased round and round for about 5 minutes, but it probably was, only a couple of seconds. That was number one that I think started it all off.
But can you remember a time prior to that when you were okay with birds?
Yes, actually, good point. I grew up by the river, and feeding the birds with my parents and my younger brother on a weekend used to be a enjoyable experience.
Like taking bread down for the ducks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I will not be doing that anytime soon.
Your fear of birds and my fear of rough seas, I think they're good examples of almost sort of permanent conditioned fear responses to perceived threats that are in a way that perhaps is sort of almost either inappropriate or maybe irrational given the actual risk.
Yeah.
Those are phobias, really.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Well, look, Amelia, you and I could talk for hours about what we've learned about fear over the last few weeks looking into it, but I think it's time we brought an expert in. Should we welcome our guest?
Yes, absolutely. I'm really excited about this one. Our guest today is a lady called Vicki Anstey, who has done some incredible things in her lifetime. She was one of the first ever female contestants on Channel 4's SAS Who Dares Wins programme. And she also set a new world record for rowing unaided across the Pacific Ocean. But throwing herself into, these sorts of challenges wasn't always the person that she was. So we've invited Vicki here today to help explore the role that fear has played in her life, both from a positive and negative perspective, and how these experiences have enhanced her into the woman she is today.
Welcome, Vicki, then, to the Being Human podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to be talking to you today and learning more about all of the things you do. Before we dive into all things your world, we wondered whether it would be okay to ask you just a couple of questions to get to know you as a person first.
Of course, yeah. Go ahead.
So, Vicki, if you had to choose one song to be the theme song for your life, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I'm a huge lover of Fleetwood Mac, so maybe something like Landslide, which is a little bit about overcoming adversity. I'm casting my mind back to tracks that I had lined up on my playlist for the row. Something Inside So Strong, maybe.
Who was that? It was Labi Siffre, wasn't it, that one?
Yeah.
Keeps you motivated.
Yeah.
Who has been the biggest influence in your life and why?
Oh, that's another hard one, actually. I'm not going to say who it was. Someone very close to me. And actually, they've been a positive influence, perhaps not for the reasons that you would expect, but a reminder to me of the importance of being resilient and facing fear and embracing fear and living your life fully from the inside out, not outside looking in. That person has inspired me, certainly in my later years as well, to tread a different path, let's say.
Vicki, could you share with us one really boring thing about you that people would be surprised to hear about?
I'm quite a stickler for routine. I get quite upset if I have to break my strict routines in my day or my week. Like the question about which way round do you have a toilet roll?
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Always on the outside.
Always on the outside.
Outside.
I totally agree.
If I go to somewhere else, I use a bathroom in a pub or a restaurant or someone else's house. If it's
Do you
the wrong
change
way
it?
around, I do.
Yes, I'm so the same. So the same. I think that's an excellent, boring but entertaining conversation.
Brilliant. So if we could send you back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Write your own label in life. Don't listen to other people's narratives about who you are or what your life should look like. Write your own label.
Wonderful.
Nice. I like that a lot. So, Vicki, first question, sort of diving into your world. Could we start by asking you how you define fear? What is fear?
I define fear as actually being opportunity in disguise, which is something that I've had the privilege to discover for myself through my own life experiences. Any time that I've ever had the courage to lean into fear, there's been incredible opportunity on the other side. I mean, obviously, it is a normal chemical response to what we might perceive as danger, but danger is entirely subjective. So there are ways to kind of reframe fear and see it as a choice. Definitely discover opportunity that lies on the other side of it.
Yeah, very true. So, I mean, and you're someone that people might describe as seemingly fearless. You've rowed across the Pacific. You've stood up against Ant Middleton and Foxy in SAS Who Dares Wins. There's numerous other intrepid activities which we're looking forward to hearing more about in a moment. But you shared with us that wasn't always you. So, could we ask you to sort of, share a little bit about who you used to be and how and perhaps why you've become the person you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not fearless. So let me just kind of clarify that before I say anything more. But I have a different approach to fear these days. And certainly in the last 6 or so years of my life, have seen quite dramatic change. The context of my childhood was feeling like I was a disappointment in many ways, particularly to my mother, that I didn't sort of fit the mold of the ideal daughter that she was expecting. And, I kind of always craved the love and support and unconditional approval that she quite determinedly showed my sister. I didn't ever really feel that I got that. And from there, I guess perhaps typically, I then went on to spend 20 years of my life in quite a limiting relationship. So a marriage that ultimately led me to believe that I wasn't a very capable person. And certainly that I would amount to nothing on my own. It really was only as I approached my 40th birthday that I suddenly had chance to kind of reflect. And I guess I reached a kind of tipping point at that point and just realized that I had the right to choose what the next chapter of my life would look like. I didn't want it to look the way it did anymore. I knew that doing nothing was still doing something, that what I wasn't changing, I was ultimately choosing. And so, that was my big first lean into fear. And it was really terrifying. It was everything that I'd known since I was 19 years old. I didn't even have my own bank account until that stage when I left that marriage. So, I had really allowed myself to be limited by other people's narratives my whole life, really. I kind of lived in this ecosystem of unsupportive behavior and was always just holding out for other people's approval. So I at that stage, I kind of lost all my instincts to trust myself and to make small decisions at times and to believe in my power. And I think it was only through I had a change of career. So I originally worked in marketing and advertising, but I changed that career to my own surprise as much as anyone else's and got into the fitness industry. And I ran my own business for 12 years. And I guess through that process of, needing to improve my physical strength, I also saw the carryover into my mental and emotional reserves. So I kind of grew new edges, I guess. And I guess at the age of 40, I just got to this stage where I just knew that I had to make a change. So I did, and I left. And fairly soon afterwards, I was encouraged by some friends to apply for SAS Who Dares Wins.
I was going to ask you about that. There were others around you that sort of reflected back the need to change as well?
Yeah, I think, I've got incredible friends, and I think they just believed in my power more than I did. It's funny how you can have physical strength and be seen to be thriving in life in other people's eyes, but on the inside, you're emotionally in a very different space. That was certainly true for me. I think two almost contradictory things can coexist in the same space. And that's, I guess, where I was. I was physically very capable, but I didn't believe in myself. That process allowed me to see that my self-belief could be a match for my physical capabilities in the end. It was hugely eye-opening, quite life-changing for me.
You were one of the first female contestants on SAS Who Dares Wins. For our listeners who aren't as familiar with the show, would you mind just briefly explaining sort of what that involved?
I'm biased, but I think it's probably one of the biggest tests of performance against adversity out there. It's kind of the closest thing that you can get to SAS selection for, civilians. It certainly isn't, just to clarify, the same as SAS selection. And I certainly do not think that anyone who passes SAS Who Dares Wins selection would necessarily therefore make it into the SAS. Very far from it. However, it's a pretty close reenactment of the selection process. So you're basically just put through your paces to undertake the most physically, mentally challenging tasks imaginable, really, from, heights, dealing with water, endurance, and then mental interrogation as well.
My heart's beginning to race just listening to you. What did you enjoy most about the experience?
I mean, I got a huge sense of self-discovery from that program. Like, I realized what my capabilities were. I genuinely went into it thinking, if I last 24 hours, I'll be amazed. I couldn't quite believe that I'd even been selected to do it in the first place. It was the first year that women were allowed to participate in the program. And also, I was 40 years old. So there were people on that show who were 20 years younger than me. So at times I was like, this is actually not as bad as some of the darkest moments of my divorce. Even when I was sat in a dark room with a bag on my head and earphones and being verbally interrogated, it still in many ways wasn't as bad as some of the reality of my life had been until that point.
That sounds like it was quite a lot of cognitive reflection going on in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I remember one of the worst times actually was not a specific task necessarily, but I remember at one point sitting on my camp bed, and of course you get a certain amount of time off, but you never know how long that time's going to last. So it could be 5 minutes, it could be 2 hours, you could be eating some food, or you could be on the toilet, such as they were. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I can deal with the anxiety of the unknown and just this constant high adrenaline state. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I can deal with this all the time. I mean, literally, it could be 3 a.m. and you'd be ripped out of your bed and screamed at and taken outside. So, and then I guess just stage by stage, getting further through it, I realized actually, I just need to get on with this. And once I'm doing the thing, it's never as bad as thinking about the thing. We'd sort of arrive at certain location points and we'd see the setup for something. And you'd think, oh, hell, we're going to be abseiling down that. And then it was actually a forward abseil. So everything that you kind of thought you could second guess was completely incorrect. There was always something that they pulled out that was completely unexpected. But it teaches you to just stop asking questions and stop needing to have information. And I think that's a huge skill to have. And when I take people away on my trips with We Are Intrepid, that's one thing that I won't let people know when breakfast is, when lunch is, what we're doing next, even day to day, what the schedule looks like. I want people to live in the moment, because when you are present, there's no space for fear. Fear only exists in relation to what's gone before and what you're afraid of in the future. When you're really present, you can't feel fear unless you are in direct fear, which let's face it, we almost never are. Exactly. We never are in direct fear or peril these days.
What I infer from that is that, a lot of our response to fear is irrational.
Absolutely.
And therefore it's about sort of taking ownership of that back.
Yeah.
And dragging your sort of cognitive response into a more rational place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about addressing it. I encourage people on my trips to, really delve into that, understand what the fear is, strip the layers away, ask themselves, ask each other questions. What really are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Give it a name. Even make fun of it, collapse it at its core, undermine that fear, because you are not your thoughts.
Wise words.
You can overcome anything.
I know that as you're saying that, I'm still thinking my fear of birds isn't going anywhere. I'm like, what is it? What do I name it?
We'll work on it, Amelia. We'll work on it.
Well, I mean, I grew up thinking that I had a fear of water because I had a near drowning incident when I was a child with my sister. But
This sounds familiar.
I had some cognitive behavioural therapy before I did the row, because I was terrified that I'd be overwhelmed by the fear once I lost sight of land, or even just, realised the enormity of what I was doing. And through that process, I worked out that actually I wasn't afraid of water. And in fact, I can swim. And because I'm physically quite strong. I'm quite capable in water, but I was terrified of hurting someone else. And my fear had wrapped itself in so much guilt that at the age of 6 years old, I'd panicked in response to the situation I was in and pulled my sister under so that I could get above the water to breathe myself. And then she had to do the same to me. And so this kind of trauma that created the fear in the first place occurred, and that was real. But actually, throughout my whole life since then, my brain has played clever games, keeping me away from water.
As you mention, water, could you share with us about your adventure across the Pacific Ocean? How did that present itself?
So, I basically was at a PR event, a press event for SAS Who Dares Wins, and someone literally came up to me and said, "Would you like to row an ocean?" And
a light question.
Yeah. And I was just in the throes of this whole new world where I'd just been confronted with what my real capabilities were and loved it, and just discovered that saying yes to things was pretty thrilling.
I'm really interested in that, the answering the call to adventure when it arrives.
Yeah. Well, I have this acronym that I use, which is READY. And the whole idea that you can be laying down the foundations for being ready for opportunity when it comes to you. And there are ways that we can do that. And I sort of subconsciously was doing that for many, many years until I got to the people often ask me, how long did it take you to prepare for SAS Who Dares Wins? Well, I had literally 2 weeks notice. So I didn't have any time. I just was lucky that I was ready to take that opportunity, and so glad that I was in a position to do that, because my life has markedly changed since that. It was sort of, the original catalyst, I guess, for everything else. But yeah, so I'd done SAS, and there was one event during that program that I felt I really, I guess, let myself down a bit, that I felt like I'd really overcome my fear of heights, and I discovered a lot of my capabilities, but the water had literally overcome me, and the very scenario that I described earlier with my sister when I was a child kind of played out, and I panicked and had to be dragged out of the water and nearly drowned and had to get medical attention, and it was awful and quite traumatic and quite humiliating. And so I just thought, when this girl asked me, would I like to row an ocean, my immediate thought was, well, this is my opportunity to really address this barrier in my life that I feel like is preventing me from doing potentially so many things. And so, I said yes. And I thought I'll work the rest out afterwards. And then began what ultimately was 3 years of a project to get to the start line.
What did you learn through that experience, would you say, of rowing across the ocean?
I mean, it was an incredible experience. It was also a very difficult experience for me because I had to completely change the crew after the postponement in 2020. I had to find 2 new crewmates because the girls that I was planning to row with weren't able to defer their places. And the 2 girls that I rowed with already knew each other, were already friends. And it became a very, very difficult dynamic. We're very different people. I'm quite emotionally open, and they were both, quite emotionally closed, I think. Took a very kind of functional approach to what we were doing. I don't think we were helped by the circumstances with COVID, the fact that we were in 3 different countries, the fact that we couldn't really get together to train, the fact that I didn't meet one of them until we actually got to San Francisco on the start line.
Wow.
So there were a lot of factors. I was seasick then for 23 days.
Blimey.
Which was debilitating. The only thing I could do was row. That was the only thing that made me feel better. So I was taking nothing into my system really, and rowing 12 to 16 hour days. And, the dynamic, I think, was quite affected by that, amongst other things. And we kind of just became this team of 2 plus 1.
Yeah.
And so it was very isolating for me, if I'm honest. But I think what I learned from that a really valuable life lesson was how to sit with my own thoughts and my own feelings, and how to process them, and how to constantly regain perspective, and how to get through what I call emotional endurance. So people always talk about physical endurance and mental endurance, even, but emotional endurance, like, that's a whole other game. I had to tolerate a lot.
Yeah.
And yet in the background, we obviously achieved this incredible goal together. We got a world record. We survived. No one got badly injured. No one fell in. Although I was tempted to throw myself in a few occasions. Nobody wanted to quit, but we hadn't really spent the time together. We hadn't spent the time understanding each other, where our boundaries lay. We certainly hadn't really honestly understood each other's true purpose.
Yeah. Given the time again, what would you do differently in which case?
I mean, firstly, I wouldn't do it again. I've already got a tick in that box. I have no intention. I was so determined to do it. And this is where I think, I am a pretty stubborn, determined person. When I get an idea in my head, I won't ever give up. And I think sometimes that isn't always a great trait. And it kind of blinkered me to a lot of things. There are a lot of red flags. And, I was so utterly determined to do this thing, and it had been delayed by a year, and I'd spent, by the time we started, 3 years raising the finance. I knew nothing about ocean rowing, absolutely nothing. I had to learn everything from scratch, from aspects of engineering and mechanics to weather patterns, and going out and asking for sponsorship, and having to deal with my fear of water, having to do open water swimming, having to do cognitive behavioral therapy, having to do VHF radio communication. There were so many aspects to it that, and I was running my own business. I had a full-time job. We all did. It was a huge amount of investment and sacrifice involved. And I guess I just wasn't prepared to see it fail. So I guess what we didn't do was ask difficult enough questions to ourselves and each other. And I think I was afraid to push some of those questions, even though instinctively I knew that we should be sharing our fears and our vulnerabilities on a far deeper level to go out and do something like that. But I was so afraid that it would unravel before we'd even set off. What I didn't account for was that it would unravel anyway in the middle of an ocean.
But as you say, you made it across in record time.
We did, which is
amazing,
testament to what human beings can do. I mean, between us, we lost 35 kilos in weight.
Wow.
I lost 25% of my body weight. We broke 3 oars. We, by the end of it, were rowing 4 hours on and 2 hours off. We were out there for 60 days, 17 hours, 6 minutes.
That's not a number you're ever going to forget, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. We used a bucket for a toilet for that entire length of time. And
I bet, when you tell the story, people, particularly children, they'll ask you, how did you go to the loo?
Yeah, it's funny. The funniest questions people ask are, what did you do when it rained? Did you row at night? Like, as if you suddenly had the opportunity to step onto a super yacht. And people want to see pictures of your hands and your bum.
Yeah. Vicki, lots of people feel a sense of anxiety in their personal or professional lives, a bit of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, failure, being labelled, you mentioned earlier on, unhelpful comparisons with others, and so on. What advice would you give to others, perhaps looking to take the first steps into changing how they feel, bearing in mind that not everyone has the opportunity to perhaps undertake some of the incredible adventures that you have?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I didn't think I was the type of person to undertake those things either a while ago. So who knows? But I think the thing that creates that sense of imposter syndrome is like overwhelm. And I think what's really important to know is that I use this phrase, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. And it's so simple. If you can break it down, whatever it is, and start to get obsessed about the process rather than the outcome, then you'll find yourself on the path to something new, and things will start changing inevitably because you've just set yourself, you've just taken that first step. so it could be just having conversations. And so many of the endeavors that I've taken on, I thought, what the hell am I doing? I know nothing about this. And that's now become my driver. So I will only ever take on endeavors that I feel like I'm not qualified to do, almost as a means to prove to myself and others that that can be done. But just to have a conversation with someone who might have already done it can completely open your eyes to the fact that the people you think who do these amazing things in life aren't necessarily who you think they are. Or they don't look the way that you think they might look. Or I remember having many different conversations with particularly women who had rowed oceans before we did our row. And just the comfort that I drew from having Zoom calls mainly with people, I just thought, God, you don't look the way that I thought you might look. I expected to get on this call and feel completely inadequate and intimidated. And, well, do you know what? Maybe if you can do it, then I can do it, or at least I can have a go. And I think that just the fear of failure stops us from doing so many things.
There's a theme as well coming through that I'm picking up on, which is this challenge yourself, but also talk to others.
Yeah.
Explore how you're feeling and learn from their experiences as well. Seek out people that have done things.
Exactly. And I think anyone who is vulnerable enough to pick up the phone and say, I wonder if you could have a conversation with me about this, I'm terrified of doing it. What they'll find is that anyone that they might be speaking to who's done the thing will also have gone through those exact same emotions and processes and felt like an imposter themselves at certain times. And, I think if we can all just be a bit more human in this world and not, I don't know, lead with our egos and be about the things that we've achieved. The things that I've achieved are not actually the physical endeavors. They're just really the conduit for me. The things I've achieved is, knowing that I need to write my own label in life and that I can trust in my inner strength and that I can trust in the lessons that adversity delivers. They're the lessons that I'm passionate about sharing with other people in my speaking and mentoring and coaching, and in the trips that I run with We Are Intrepid. It's never about the chest beating, medal swinging, world record stories. There's so much more to it than that.
Absolutely. Well, look, it's been lovely talking to you, as always. It's certainly opened my eyes.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. That was fascinating hearing about what your learnings have been from all these wonderful and amazing experiences that you've been a part of.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that conversation.
What a super guest. What struck you as we were talking to Vicki, Jez?
Yeah, she's amazing, isn't she? Really inspirational.
Yeah, for sure.
What really struck me was the way in which she has consciously made a decision to move from that sort of irrational response and to take more control over how she responds to it. I love the point she made about the fact that it's very, very rare for us to really be in danger or in peril. And so therefore, an awful lot of how we respond to situations is actually quite irrational. As I mentioned earlier, I've not really lived through what I'd call prolonged fear.
Yeah.
But there have definitely been moments where work, for example, in the past has made me anxious for extended periods of time, whether that was working for an immediate boss who I struggled with or going through change and the threat of redundancy, for example. And in those moments, I remember feeling powerless, having no control, which of course wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was hard to see it that way. So listening to Vicki, I think I'm going to try to consciously think about why I might be feeling anxious at any given point, and explore whether my response to that situation is appropriate or not. What about you, Amelia? What thoughts do you have when you listen to Vicki speak?
Yeah, well, I think immediately thinking back to my own experiences as she was talking about sort of facing those fears of heights, it took me straight back to doing a bungee jump in New Zealand diving headfirst out of a hut and free falling for what feels like a lifetime is I did look at it as 8.5 seconds. But it was absolutely terrifying. And it was especially that moment where you're getting all buckled in inside the hut, and then you're asked to step onto, the ledge of the platform, exactly. And they sort of throw all the ropes that they've attached to you in front of you, and you feel that initial pull of like, that's where I'm going, and that stomach moment just goes. But then you do it, and it was one of the most invigorating, amazing things I've ever done.
We're almost at the end of another episode. I can't tell you how much I enjoy how these conversations are going. Roll on the next one.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited for the next one. On the subject of which, we will be looking at habits in the not too distant future. So we thought that we should hold ourselves accountable and develop a good habit. We'll see if we can give it a go at developing a good habit over the next few weeks, and then talk about that experience as part of our conversation. So, Jez, what are you going to have a go at?
Here we go. Commitment live. I'm going to try and develop the habit of a bit more deliberate guitar practice, rather than just picking up my guitar and playing along to songs that I like. So, in short, I'm going to try and move past this plateau that I've been on for probably 20 years or more. And you, Amelia, what habit are you going to try and nurture?
Well, one I've really wanted to nurture and failed many a time at doing is to get into a better habit of reading. So I am going to try and read for 15 to 20 minutes every day.
Well, let's see how we both get on. Well, that really does bring us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
Boo!
Oh, that's going to go in the bloopers, isn't it? You actually did scare me.
Did I? Yes.
Yeah. Am I starting? No, you're starting.
No, you're starting.
I'm starting.
You're starting.
I'm starting. Okay. Take one. Did I change that before printing? After printing it?
We're not
Possibly.
blaming here.
This isn't a blame culture.
God no.
No. You're saying it's my fault.